Okay, folks. Well, look, I'm very excited about today's podcast, but for those of you who just tuned in, you have to know that this was the most difficult podcast to schedule, I think, in the past year. It was actually easier to schedule the podcast with the United States of America FDA Commissioner versus Simon Arkell, who is joining Healthcare Unfiltered for the first time ever. And Simon, we're hoping that you're going to play your cards right, because if you do, I can't promise, but I may invite you again.
Oh, good. The other times I really apologize, but that one time I had to rearrange my sock drawer, so there was that. God, yeah,
Listen, just because you have
the cat was sick. I
just
don't know. There
because you
was
have an
so many reasons.
just because you have an Australian accent does not mean that you know what you're talking about. But we're gonna try.
No, but you get let off the hook a lot more when you have an Australian accent in
You do,
America.
you do. Simon, on a serious note, really welcome to the show. We've known each other for a while. We've interacted on many occasions, but I've been really truly looking forward to this because I've been wanting to have a podcast about artificial intelligence, and there's a lot out there about it. And I was thinking who would be the perfect guest to simplify the topic, but also to tell us the hype versus the reality. And I couldn't think of a better person. So I could explain to listeners and viewers why I thought of you as the right guest. Tell us a little bit about you, just the Simon Arkell, the person.
It was probably because all of the smart people were not available. So
That's true, actually.
yeah. But thank you for having me. You're one of my favorite oncologists, by the way. By the way, I love the cup. You are the funniest oncologist I've ever met. I love your sense of humor. You make fun of me more than I think anyone in this industry, and vice versa, maybe. And we have a good time with it. And so oncology is not always the funniest topic. I think if you were not an oncologist, you might be a comedian, a stand-up comic. So it's always fun
At least
to
my kids
interact with
would
you.
laugh at my jokes. They have to.
That's right. That's right. And me. But yeah, I appreciate the invitation. So my name's Simon Arkell. I am the CEO and co-founder of Ryght AI, which is a healthcare and life sciences focused artificial intelligence company focused on generative AI, that new stuff. I'm a long-term serial entrepreneur in that I've been from Australia, came to the US in the late 80s for college on an athletic scholarship. And so I did my sport for a number of years and always loved doing startups and new projects. And I kind of had to because I couldn't have a full-time job while I was going to school, but also competing in my sport. And so I would start projects, start little companies on the side. And then by the time I retired from my sport, I was actually 30. And
what sport was it, Simon? Do you want to share with us what sport was that?
Yeah, I was a pole vaulter, track and field. So I represented Australia for many years until 96.
Okay, well, don't downplay this. This is huge. You represented the country in a sport. So that's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I moved to the US because there was no way to improve enough to make the Olympics, which was my goal as a young kid, if I stayed in Australia. So I kind of rolled the dice, came to the US, wrote to 37 universities. All of them ignored me except one, which was New Mexico. So I graduated from University of New Mexico and competed for the university and improved enough to make the Olympic Games team in 92. And then my last meet of my career was the 1996 Olympic Games. And by the time I retired, all of my friends from high school had graduated college and they started their careers, of course, when they were 23. And so I felt like this huge chip on my shoulder to try and catch up with them. And I realized that if I went and got a 9 to 5, that probably wasn't going to happen. Plus, that didn't interest me that much, having already started a couple of projects or little companies while I was still competing. So I kind of got into the startup game, A, because I'm highly unemployable, I think, but B, because if I wanted a job, I'd start a company and do whatever excited me at the time. Excuse me. So technology was it. And for the first venture capital backed company I started was in the .com boom days, which was 1998. And it was in enterprise content management, non-healthcare related. A number of companies later, I started prediction software with an X, which was a machine learning software company that was enterprise platform for predictive analytics. And this was when it was called that. It wasn't called AI yet. And this was in 2009. So did that. We raised about $46 million from VCs, got into patient risk analytics. So we deployed tech to nurses at hospitals who were discharging patients and wanted to be alerted if there was a risk of a patient readmitting back into the hospital within 30 days, which is an expensive problem if you violate in the top quartile or if you perform in the bottom quartile. And so that was a really great experience for me as first time venture-backed CEO, going through the whole fundraising, Series A, B, C, D, selling the company. It was a fairly mediocre outcome, but it was a really great experience and wouldn't give it up for anything. And then I really wanted to start an AI company because in 2016, it was really the next thing. And I was looking different industries, but really loved healthcare. And then I got a call from one of my customers at Prediction Software. And he said, hey, I've done some digital pathology stuff at Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus. And this guy, Dave, was a friend and customer. And I was really intrigued because it involved machine vision AI on pathology images, whole slide images, which was really interesting to me at the time. Came with access to data as well as a cloud platform that he'd developed. And we ended up re-engineering it. But the point was that we started the company with a third co-founder. And you know Dave and TJ really well. Good friends to this day. And we started this company and immediately raised capital. We're in a hot space. We had some success between us. And we got this thing off the ground and started out doing machine vision AI on whole slide images and we created technology that could identify or classify tumors in whole slide images as accurately as a trained pathologist who's sitting at home without the phone ringing, but a pathologist doing a ton of things, concurrently during the day with the phone ringing off the hook and lots of interruptions, we were actually more accurate. But then we realized that if we wanted to match patients to clinical trials, which became the true north of our company, we needed to get access to all of the patient data. It just wasn't identifying and we weren't going through FDA submission to try and use it as a primary diagnosis tool. And so we thought, okay, only 5% of patients ever gets their slides imaged in oncology. And that's not good enough because obviously what happens to the other 95%? So we created natural language processing, which is another type of AI, where you train a model based on unstructured text. And you could pull out from pathology reports, specific markers, mutations that could be targetable in precision medicine. And it was really, really accurate. And we thought, wow, we're onto something. And so we created a cloud service which was like a matching tool to match patients in real time to precision oncology trials that we had loaded into the system. And we would load all of their inclusion-exclusion criteria with an automated tool to break that down and drop it into the database. And we were pulling data from pathology reports, from medical records, but then have you ever heard of a company called Caris? C-A-R-I-S?
I have heard of the company. I just don't know what their core capability is.
Well, I'll tell you about it over a glass of wine. And but Foundation Medicine, Caris, NeoGenomics, Invitae, you name it, we were ingesting their long-form XML reports into the database, matching that up with the NLP where we identified certain markers in the pathology reports. We're pulling specific history of the patient from the medical reports and integrating to many different types of EMR, putting it together in a common data model in a data lake, and a real-time matching engine. Anyway, long story short, Chadi, we had a pretty unique business model because we did have competitors, although not that many back then, because we started really in 2018. But we were competing against companies like Deep Six, and you may have heard of Beck Health. They're in that space now. And there's a number of companies that have their own matching tools. Concert AI now has one, et cetera, et cetera. And we didn't have much competition back then, but what we did have, and I'd learned this stolen it from another industry and company, which was a way to get critical mass by making the tech and the service free of charge to providers. Because what I'd learned at the previous company was that selling expensive software to provider networks is a really slow, laborious, and painstaking process. So we decided to focus on community oncology because they needed it. They had minorities in the middle of, the country somewhere who by no means did they have access to the sorts of clinical trials, the research that the Mayo Clinic and MD Anderson patients were getting access to. So what if we brought it to them, which is a very fragmented industry in community oncology? We made this tech available free of charge and gave them services to help with their research coordination services, because CRCs are overworked, underpaid, leave, and then the provider doesn't have a lot of options to participate in research. And then by de facto, by default of bringing these together, we would basically be a virtual network where we were defragmenting hundreds of locations around the US and really looking like one network to the sponsors. And so we ended up at 250 locations around the US in just 2.5 years since we started to really roll it out. We had 600,000 active oncology patients, 600 oncologists, and we were really getting repeatability with biotechs and pharma just saying, hey, let's load this study. Please find us these patients that have the KRAS mutation, whatever it happened to be. We would identify them, nurture them down the funnel to consent and enrollment, and then we would get paid a subscription, but also when that happened. And it was pretty exciting time there for a while because we were just closing new deals all the time. We had a head of sales named Tyrone Richardson, who's just a rock star, and he's actually joined as a chief commercial officer at the new company and co-founder. And we got approached to sell the company, and we ended up selling it to Paradigm, which you may have heard of. And Paradigm under Kent Telke and Milind Kamkokar, who's no longer there, but the two co-founders, along with Arch Ventures and General Catalyst, they raised a ton of money during ZIRP, which is zero interest rate time, and it was a lot of money flowing. And they took a chunk of that and paid for us. And we sold the company in May of 2022. But it was brutal because we weren't allowed to announce it until January of 2023. So we'd been acquired, and we could tell people kind of off the record, but couldn't really announce it. So that's what happened. And then we started the new company. Happy to tell you all about that and what we're focusing on. But that's kind of my story, just serial entrepreneur, former athlete, and just love tech, very personally affected by oncology, by cancer, obviously affects everyone. That's been the focus of any philanthropy or fundraising or support efforts I've done in my life, because I just can't stand the thought of a child getting cancer, or anyone for that matter. And so to be working in this industry is just amazing, to bring my skill sets together and really help and see if I can help in the fight against cancer is just a personal passion of mine.
Well, you have, I'm certain of that. And I want to move on in a little bit to what you're doing currently to understand a little bit better. But before we do that, Simon, you mentioned the word AI many times. And I think we hear it all over the place, right? I mean, whether it's in the workplace, water cooler conversations, TV, wherever it is. Can you simplify it for the non-tech person, the non-computer savvy? I mean, a layman person who's listening to this, what do we mean by AI?
It's easy. It's how you raise money. If you're a company, you have to say you have AI. And then magically, like, money shows up in your bank account. It's actually not quite that easy. But 2 years ago, before generative AI and ChatGPT even came along, 3 years ago, I was doing a keynote at an event, and I discovered and presented this, that there was something like 30% of companies who say they have AI or that they're AI companies actually have no AI. The thing about AI is that it can mean many, many different things. It's like saying healthcare versus precision oncology. I mean, it's the catch-all. Underneath that are different types of AI. What happened in the days of the early analytics was around rules-based systems, expert systems that were effectively just decision trees that helped, guide software or decisions. Then, when I started prediction with my co-founders, it was about predictive analytics. Predictive analytics is also called machine learning. And machine learning is where and specifically we call it supervised machine learning, where you build a model which is trained or created with data that is historical data, which has a number of different input variables into that model. And when you train it, and by the way, when you're training it, you hold out like 10 or 15% of that data so that you can test it to see how accurate it is. So in our world, it was back then, it was predicting a specific patient's risk of readmitting into a hospital. So before you discharge them, are they at a 92% risk of readmitting in 30 days? And if so, here are the 5 things you need to do and tell them before they leave so that you can reduce that risk. And so it's a great way for you to identify kind of red, yellow, green cases and what to do as a result. But that machine learning model takes months to build. The input variables that go into that come from the medical record and other places, and you can have kind of non-EMR centric input variables that could be social.
Build the model, like the humans build the model, like you build it.
Oh yeah, the human builds the model. And we hired expensive data scientists who literally sat in a room for 3 months. 80% of the problem is wrangling the data and putting it into rows and columns, and then understanding what the input variables are and which ones are the signals that are important for that model. Because you're not going to train it with 200 inputs. You're going to train it with 10. And we had very accurate models, but I'll tell you the problem is that you'd labor for months and build these things. The number one determinant of readmission in Texas was whether or not the patient was obese, and in New York, it was whether or not the patients were taking psychotropic medication, meaning depression medication. And the models were accurate, but geographically they had to be different. So you had to retrain them depending on, it was a nightmare. It took months and months to do any of that stuff. And then having a model, I always thought, gee, this is cool, we're 94% accurate. The customer does not care. The customer meaning Carolina's Healthcare, which was our biggest customer at the time, which is Atrium. And they were like, what do I do with that? So there's this huge lift from being a scientist to deploying this and making it usable by human beings who don't know how to build an algorithm. Like a nurse who literally just wants to know what to tell the patient before being discharged. And that's the secret sauce, and where I'm not a coder. I'm a very technical sales-minded person. I'm not a sales-minded software engineer. I'm the opposite. But I'm technical enough to understand how to take complexity and convert that into value for business users. And all they want is for you to operationalize this, automate it, do it in real time. Create something for the humans to do.
Just again, to even simplify it further. So let's say when I go into Amazon, my Amazon app, and the Amazon app just shows a couple of items for me to buy. Is that AI also? Is that because they look at my prior purchases and they say, well, this guy may like this. Is that also AI?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And so it's another form of predictive model where it's looking at the variables. Not your audience probably doesn't know this, but you love kitten sweaters, obviously. I know this about you. And
I do.
And so when you're on Amazon, it's going to show you the coolest kitten sweater you've ever seen, and you are going to buy that. And had that ad never been there, you never would have looked for that kitten sweater. But if you show me the kitten sweater, I'm not going to want that. I'm not a kitten sweater guy like you.
So what is to get to, before we get into what you're doing now, but to get to this 94% accuracy.
Yeah.
Like you said, you have 3 months data scientists going and mining the data, doing all of these things. Is there an art to this? Is this almost close to statistics and math?
I think it is, but I think there's an art and a science to it, because you have to have a feel for the model. What do you think are the signals in the data? What are those going to be in order to lead? And then having domain specificity and expertise is going to be helpful as well compared to a generalist, which I'll get to why that's important for us in the current company. So to finish the thought, then, so up until ChatGPT came along, artificial intelligence meant anything from those old school expert systems or decision tree type stuff, but and analytics. But most importantly, machine learning, which is supervised machine learning, where the human is spending months building something that's very narrow and very accurate at doing just one thing. So we could predict with 94% accuracy if that patient was going to readmit within 30 days. And by the way, do these things. We sold it for millions of dollars. Just to, one customer, they had a huge need for this stuff. But what was missing, Shadi, was that once you did that one thing, and this happened at Deeplands, we did an NLP model that went to try and get that mutation out of that pathology report. And it did it with one mutation or one group of mutations, but it couldn't look at all of the information all the time in a real-time fire hose of data and say, wow, here's some insights. So guess what happened? Large language models came out, which was the ChatGPT, exploded into people's brains. And now they're like, oh my God, this is completely different. You know why? Because it's unsupervised. Because you can point a language model at massive corpuses of data that are completely separate from each other. It will understand that data in a split second and allow you to interrogate it, allow you to ask it questions, allow it, it will allow you to break down those results, put them into a structured format, create a new machine learning model, put it into a dashboard, query a database with, code, SQL code that helps you extract that information. It's so much. Look at images, multimodal. And so the new technology is so important and so dramatically different that we had to start this company because we'd spent millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, and many, many man years of time building one model at a time. And now you point this tech and it can look at everything at once, but it's a double-edged sword.
But when we talk about ChatGPT, so you go into ChatGPT and say, whatever, who is Simon Arkell? Does the system go in and search all databases in the world and they find your name and they try then to synthesize it and then send me a paragraph as to who you are? So, but obviously there could be some mistakes. I mean, anybody could put anything on the web. So there's no way for the system to verify truth from lies, for example.
And I think that's getting better, but that was absolutely the biggest problem. The problem with having a that's called a foundational model that looks at everything and is very, very big and very broad. I call that global warming because it's very, very wide and very shallow. And what helped us at Deeplands and why we sold the company for a big multiple very successfully, all our VCs loved us, was specifically because we went deep and narrow. We went deep into precision oncology and community. And we got really expert at what a small provider in the middle of nowhere is going to need in order to solve their problem. And so we're doing the same thing here because this concept of hallucination, which everyone's now heard of, is what you point out. And hallucination is interesting because the model is very confident in its wrong answer. And so are you really going to make a decision to, not that you would, and we're not doing this, treat a patient for cancer because the AI is telling you to? What if they're wrong?
Right.
And so, we have this anyway. So what we're doing now is we've gone very deep and narrow in a couple of overlapping Venn diagrams.
So that's the regenerative AI.
Yeah, generative, and it's
generative AI.
Regenerative AI is when you're trying to look at,
you're
trying to make people younger with AI.
Yeah,
but this is generative AI.
I would love for you to do that, by the way.
You and I both need that, I think.
Maybe your next company could do that. So what is generative AI then?
The generative AI is what everyone got to understand with ChatGPT. And there's big problems, obviously. So we have to start a company. But we didn't want to start a company until we had some sort of unfair advantage, got access to a customer's data that allowed us to really get intelligent about this industry, life sciences industry and healthcare. But also, one of the people who said, hey, you've got to start a company, one of our co-founders is my old CTO from Prediction 2 companies ago. He was a Sun Microsystems distinguished engineer and CTO of their web services business. He built an incredible platform with the team, Alexi and others who are on our team now. And I know that he can build an enterprise-grade scale-out software architecture and platform very, very quickly. And there aren't that many people in the world who can really do that as well and efficiently. So I was like, yes, need Krupe, John Krupe. Alex Dickinson, my co-founder, he'd sold Helixis to Illumina and was their senior VP for 8 years. And that's genomics and obviously precision medicine. And I'm like, okay, check. He's a known, successful guy. Wanted Tyrone, who was our sales rock star over at Deep Lens, and he came in as chief commercial officer. And anyway, others, head of marketing and product from Deep Lens. And we got the band back together, hit the ground running to do what we think that is going to be an Achilles heel for generative AI. That is that it has to be extremely knowledgeable about this industry to be usable by drug companies for clinical trials, for drug discovery, commercial targeting, or CROs for that matter. It needed to be highly secure because obviously, although security and SOC 2 and high trust, et cetera, are important in traditional architectures, this generative AI stuff is different because the model is helping embed the data into the database, but also summarize it on the way out. And in a multi-tenant environment, it has to not share data with other customers. And so you have to, and in generative AI, it's quite different. It's not like just separating a CPU. The language model forgets what it did previously and then starts a new thing, but there is specific nuance. And then it has to have data that trains it so that it doesn't hallucinate. So we've got a ton of publicly available industry data. We've got data that we have unique access to, and we've trained it to be very deep. And our website says, enterprise generative AI with a PhD in life sciences, which I love. It's a cool tagline, but it's just very, very knowledgeable. And so when it says, hey, here are the things you could do to optimize your clinical trial, or here's a drug protocol, or here's a proposal, or here's an IND document that it's writing for you. By the way, we're summarizing all of this information and providing this to you. But here are the 10 documents we used in order to get our answer. And if you click on the link, you can see the actual document itself. And so now you can be sure that the hallucination isn't going to run afoul and send you in the wrong direction. And so we had to put all of this together, not only in the concept of a secure AI with a model, but we're running 10 models. The big foundational ones. You can have the commercial ones like GPT, and it's not called Chat GPT when you're plugging into the API. It's called GPT Turbo, so GPT 3.5 or 4 or 4.5 Turbo. Or open source. We love open source because you can do a lot with it, and it's basically leapfrogging commercial models right now. So think of Llama 2 or Mistral or foundational models. But then there are very specific models that just know this industry. They're trained on this one called Hyena DNA, which is a genomics trained language model. And if you have like 10 models that are all different, fit for purpose in order to maximize the output of this platform, how are we going to handle the orchestration across those language models, pick the right one for the co-pilot or the application, use the language model to embed it's called chunking and embedding into the vector database, all these new terms. And then when the results come back from the vector database, to summarize all of the different inputs across different models and then send it back. Or if it's in a workflow and it goes into a chain like a smart agent, that's orchestration. Orchestration is the underpinning of doing this at scale in an enterprise environment. And we're experts in enterprise orchestration, web services, pointing to specific machine learning models when required, putting it through the workflow, showing it in a dashboard somewhere, embedding it into an application, or getting unstructured data at scale across millions of unstructured records, putting them into structure, putting them in our platform, and allowing a human to just ask questions of that data that 20 minutes before may have been a fact. I mean, it's incredible what this stuff can do. But you can't do it if you're just relying on Chat GPT, because it's going to not be secure. If you paste any company secrets into Chat GPT, they could show up as a Google result somewhere, and you've got to be very careful. So that's what we do, and it's been highly successful.
So, there's a methodology of this, which my understanding, if I'm, please correct me if I'm wrong, you look at data sources from all over the place. Some of it are public data sources, some of it are proprietary data sources that you have access to. And you make sure that these are secure, and then you start training them to answer all of these questions.
Well, it's every customer's own secret data, proprietary data.
They're able to
but
enter
only,
their own data, yeah.
Yeah, and so their tenant, their environment is trained on their own data,
right?
Which is now any employee who has the rights. Again, it's another thing. It's like authentication and registration. So based on your Okta account, how many is a specific employee allowed to see certain data,
right.
etc. Authentication. And so we do that authentication, but it allows the employees to interrogate any of the enterprise data and then use the co-pilots or the applications. A co-pilot's like a simple, hey, I'm connected to that data there. I'm going to help you write this document, as an example. An application could be a proper patient matching application that's fully embedded through an API. And yeah, it's training on the customer's own data. So each customer of ours has a system that's trained on their own company data, and no other customer of ours will ever benefit from what they do with their training. That makes sense.
So you're providing the almost customized, individualized platform for each company that wants to use, they have their own data and they want to leverage your platform to do additional analytics on their own data.
Yeah, and it could be analytics asking how many clinical trials have we successfully performed in non-small cell lung cancer, and which countries were the most successful. That is in a database somewhere, but guess what? There's silos everywhere. That's hard to answer. You have to go to an individual who knows the history, in many cases. Or we have a customer that is using it for employee interrogation, over 1,000 customers, but they also have 5 software applications, and they want to plug this in so that all of their existing software apps for their customers now have generative AI capabilities, so their customers can ask questions of their data in that software. And so we have a platform API story for builders, which is software companies, real world data companies, and builders at biotechs, pharma, CROs. But we also have those co-pilots or apps for the customers, just for their employees, their knowledge workers.
The difference between AI and generative AI is the security, as well as the analytics and the tools that you are using to generate the output?
No, I'd say AI, again, is that big umbrella. Generative AI is the new sexy stuff, but it sits next to supervised machine learning, which is precision AI, and it still has its place. And, some of the old advanced analytics, predictive analytics that we used to do.
So what you're doing, though, is it's not necessarily, could be applied to non-healthcare, right? Because you're just providing platform to analyze data. Is there something specific that your platform is only applicable in your company to only healthcare?
I think it's because the software and our team has already plugged it with a ton of publicly available data. So think PubMed and ClinVar and clinicaltrials.gov. So that's one thing. It doesn't have, Bloomberg financial data, because
but you need that. If my point is, like, you can.
You could.
If you choose.
You could take our architecture and start a company and hit the ground running, and then have a new version, a new company based on that. But where we are really expert now, and the tech really understands this as well, is how to deal with healthcare and life sciences data. So one of our customers has 12 years of longitudinal, unstructured lab data on 220 million American lives, 2/3 of the US population. And so the fact that we understand how to build apps against that type of data, how to chunk and embed and retrieve and summarize and all of that stuff, and then write the code to query a database, et cetera, is very, very domain specific. And that is, VCs say, what's your defensive moat? And our moat in this business is, there are a number of them, but it's really understanding this type of data and then building applications that people want. And then it becomes a flywheel, because the more co-pilots we build for our customers, to take that co-pilot that writes a trial protocol and customizing it for another customer is really easy and quick. we had to build the infrastructure to make that possible once, but then it just becomes customizable for each customer. And the more of these apps we have, it's like a marketplace. It's like the app store. I'd never stop using an iPhone just because all my apps and stuff are all, they're there, and they have this incredible kind of ecosystem. And I think over time we create where our platform, could be seen as, the Earth. Each one of the little co-pilots or apps is a satellite running around the Earth. And the more of them you have, the more value there is to the platform.
So as I think about your platform, it seems to me that anybody in healthcare could potentially be a stakeholder of yours. In other words, if I'm a hospital, I think there's a use to what you have. If I'm a pharma, there's a use. If I'm a payer, maybe there's a use, right? I mean,
totally. Yeah.
Like you can actually scale this up to anybody in the healthcare ecosystem.
That's right. Exactly right. In fact, for a software company client of ours, we're building co-pilots for site workers in oncology. So they're SMOs and employees of the providers, the oncologists themselves, who are using this to just free their time up, kind of like the Deep Lens value prop that we used to have. So yeah, it's been really, really exciting to see where people are getting the most excited. It's great for people to be encouraged, but who's going to write a check to buy some software to prove it out? We can start at a very low investment level too, because we want to land and expand. If we went out with multi-million-dollar software on day one without proving, not ourselves, although we have to do that, but generative AI is so brand new and people still are trying to figure out where they're going to use it. But we have a really easy onboarding. It's a couple of $1,000 a month to get 25 workers using this out of the gate, and then grow into that as you deploy it over time. And then, you can spend millions later when there's value there.
And obviously this is, it has nothing, it doesn't have to be oncology. It could be like any type of anything in healthcare. I mean,
anything. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
So when you've been talking to folks who have used your platform so far, what kind of feedback are you getting? Like, are you obviously I'm assuming you care about customer feedback. That's a big assumption. but on a serious note, like when people, like, what are, I guess, the shortcomings when they come back, where you go back and try to refine it? Because no product is perfect from day one. What have you been hearing, to the extent you can share? I'm sure you can't share everything.
No, I can't share everything, but it's been extremely positive, and partly because we're now enabling actual companies to use this stuff. So as an example, there are many companies, it's not all, but many companies in our industry whose employees are banned from using ChatGPT at work because the risk of, pasting that secret document into the prompt window is just too great. And so the fact that they can even use this type of, not even us, but this type of technology through us, because it's secure, is great. But because it's got a PhD in life sciences, it's even better. It's smart. And because we built co-pilots and apps, it's even better. So a lot of them are having their minds blown about what is possible. What they're doing now is amazing, but what's possible? Because, when you try something and then the light goes on, like, oh my God, I could be doing this. It's super exciting to have those conversations because this technology is mind-blowing. You start looking at multimodal, where it's looking at images, it's generating images. I mean, we did that machine vision AI at Deep Lens with, whole slide images, but imagine looking at anything, anytime in the future and being able to extract, clinical, valid input that helps you as a business. And so where people are disappointed, I'm trying to think, I think and it's not even after they go live, it's like when they find out that this is not magic. And we use a term internally, like, let's show the magic trick, because we want to blow people's minds when we do a demo or do a video. But they expect that it will literally like do everything for them, that it literally will be magic. And now they can, go off and do something else and like replace entire jobs. And you have to say, look, come on, this is not going to just write an 80-page document for you in 10 different sections that used to be, 7 different groups within the company. It's going to do a section at a time, and it's going to give you 70% of the way there as a great first draft. So now you're an editor, not a creator. And there's great value in that, but don't expect that it's going to do that and cook dinner for you tonight.
Maybe the dinner. So Simon, I mean, every day you switch on TV and people talk about the Nvidia stock, the AMD stock, the ARM's holding, and I mean, just skyrocketing. It's crazy. What is that all about? I mean, I don't know. Like, is that generative AI also? Is that what they're doing? I mean,
yeah. No, it's absolutely incredible what's happening. By the way, market was a bit depressed a year or two ago, started to come back up. My daughter said, "Hey, I've got some savings from working at a barn." She's a horse person. And, I want to do a Robinhood account. And I'm like, yes, my baby. And so I set her up she set up a Robinhood account when she was old enough. And I helped her pick some stocks, and they were all semi-depressed tech stocks, including Nvidia and a few others that are in that ecosystem of AI, because that's the space I'm in. And in the last year, her portfolio has basically doubled.
Yeah.
And she last week I said, okay, sell Okta, although I know the co-founder of Okta, so I'll be careful here. Sell Okta and buy Nvidia, because their earnings call is coming out tomorrow, and you never know what's going to happen if they blow away expectations. Well, guess what? This week she sold Okta, she bought Nvidia, and the next day on the news, which was yesterday, it just went ballistic. Crazy. It went from 1.7 to 2 trillion.
But what do they do? Like what? Like like when I mean, you're an expert. So, and I obviously, you're not a financial analyst. So, we're not talking here to comment on the finances and the balance sheet, but just the core capability. I mean, what do they actually do so people are just going crazy?
They have the best story ever, because they were struggling. They started out when gaming, 25 years ago, they thought gaming would be a thing. It was a thing at the time. They're like, gaming requires better graphics on the computer. And these types of chips that didn't exist with CPU, which is core processing unit, they realized that CPU wasn't enough, but to do this great high-res gaming imagery on your screen with high definition, you needed a GPU. Well, GPUs process the data in a different way that's more effective for the graphics on a computer. And they did okay. They got lucky. They bought a competitor's machine after they went bankrupt, and they hobbled their way through and became like the survivor in a relatively small industry. But then they got lucky because gaming blew up, and they did pretty well. Well, then Bitcoin comes along. And when you're mining Bitcoin, a friend of mine, Fred, is the CEO of the biggest Bitcoin mining company in the world, billions in market cap. That stuff's been crazy. They realize that if you're mining Bitcoin, you can put these little machines together with GPU, and it's much more effective at dealing with those algorithms and that software in order to mine the Bitcoin. So they took off and they got another bump. Well, then AI and large language models came out, and the way that those large language models are trained and do inference, which is the scoring to get the answers. So you train them by creating the model, and you use a huge amount of GPU. CPU is not enough. So then you finish the model, you make it available, and people use the model to get the answers. That's called inference, which is the use of the model. Both of those require massive GPU, training more than inference, but inference is still crazy. Well, guess what? Everyone on the planet is now doing inference with generative AI. And they cannot make enough of these things. Their prices are high. Their profits are ridiculous. They have those monopoly rents that you talk about in economics class. And they've just overtaken Google and Amazon in market cap. And they're just like, the guy worked in Denny's when he was starting this company, literally. It's incredible. So I love it. I love the story. It's American dream. It's Silicon Valley. And they are in the tornado now, and just going for it.
But what's the future looks like? I mean, I think that it's one of those things that is this something going to be commoditized eventually? Like, what
Mhm.
is, you know what I mean? Like I bring
Yeah,
this not to, to the comparison is, I mean, look, the first time I remember, like, goodness, 15 years ago when I was buying a car and they said the navigation is an extra $2,500, right?
yeah,
To add
yeah.
the navigation. And now nobody tells you this. It's just included.
Right.
I mean, you
That's right.
cannot sell a car if you're a manufacturer unless you have a navigation in the car and a
Sure.
cameras and
Yeah.
all of these things. So, I mean, fast forward 5 years ago, where are we heading
Mhm.
with this?
Yeah, so commoditization is the right word here. So there's a couple of things. When generative AI started out, just a year and a bit ago, there were companies in Silicon Valley that said, "Hey, I'm going to build a large language model that's going to be a medical model." Well, someone who got into that early raised $50 million in a seed round at a huge valuation. Turned out that they were commoditized, and open source leapfrogged them. I think companies like that are in real trouble. You've got GPT now has a bunch of competitors, both commercially. You've seen Google with Gemini, which is actually in some ways better than GPT. GPT will come out with version 5, and everyone's going multimodal and can do video and images and text. But the open source is incredible. So it's a company called Hugging Face, which for old people like you and I, there was a company called Red Hat that came out when Linux came on as the new operating system or alternative free operating system. But guess what? Similar concept. You can deploy Linux around your organization, but it's open source. So who are you going to call when it breaks? Where's the 1-800 number behind an open source initiative? So Red Hat became that and blew up and became very successful and bought a lot of companies that were in that space, basically providing enterprise wrappers and tech around open source and then providing support for their customers. And there's a company that does that for open source large language models called Hugging Face, now worth billions of dollars. We're a close partner of theirs. Actually, we were in an article with them just a week ago. And there are over 100,000 large language models that are open source. And so you can get a Hugging Face basically access to their portal, and you can choose from 100,000 different language models. Well, guess what? If you want those for your company, you need a company like ours or a Hugging Face if you're really technical and you want to do all the plumbing yourself. You need something like that behind it. But they're going to commodity because the open source models like Llama 2 and Mistral are as accurate as the commercial models like Gemini and GPT these days. And if not, they're very, very close.
I mean, my simple mind, when I think about, again, I don't want to derail this, but I know we're almost at time. But when I think about NVIDIA and Google and things like that, like as I think as a consumer,
Mm-hmm.
I could never think of any platform or company that has as much data as Google. Like it's hard for me to
Right.
even, maybe Facebook, but to me, like Google, they know everything you search. We know the drill.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
can't think of any company that has that much data. So I'm a little bit surprised. Like I'm thinking, how is Google not really the leader in AI and generative AI? I mean, they have
Yeah.
so much data.
So
Must
much.
have data more than NVIDIA. I mean, there's no way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. And by the way, they own YouTube, which is incredible for the
Right,
future, right? Where
exactly.
you're looking at
Yeah,
multimodal. I think that's right. But there is this point of diminishing marginal utility. Again, good economics term there, but it just means that how much is enough data to have a model that's accurate enough for what you want.
right.
And so I wonder about that. Is it really sheer volumes of the data, or do you get to a point where it's enough? Is GPT trained on enough publicly available data such that they didn't have to be Google in order to create that? Because they were a raw startup with a lot of money, but they were a raw startup at the time. But I think it's going to commodity. What is completely obvious to me and us, our company, is that this has to solve problems. It can't just be a nice to have cool toy that helps you understand a certain topic, but it has to take time out of the cost. And what we're seeing across the industry, and I think this is all industries, but we're seeing that there are plenty of use cases where you can reduce someone's time spent on something, so you can reduce costs. But what's going to drive new revenue? Like, where's that? ROI is both, right? And so how can we use AI to drive brand new revenue streams that were never possible, accelerate existing revenue streams? Maybe it's discovering a new drug in a way that a human never could because their brains are too human. And a brand new drug gets invented because of generative AI. All of these things are now possible at scale, and the future is incredible. Like the next 5 years will blow your mind. You'll sit back 5 years from now and look back and go, "Oh my God, I cannot believe this was like 20 previous years."
Can you please just make sure you share with me what stocks your daughter is going to buy? If she buys Google, I'm buying
Well,
Google tomorrow.
yeah, I will have Sophie give you a call after this.
Yes, please. So I want to know when she buys Google. That's when I'm going to invest in. Simon, no, anything I should have asked you? Honestly, I could talk to you for hours. This is, to me, one of the things about being a podcaster is I get to pick the topics I want to learn about. So there's a selfish component of this, but I also honestly believe that a lot of listeners and viewers don't understand it. And I think you simplify things and you provide so much color into where things are heading. But anything I should have asked you and I completely forgot?
No, as a long-time listener and an avid reader of Toxic Exposure, I will tell you that this was an honor. And I think you can buy it on Amazon, and there's probably going to be a link just at the bottom of the screen here.
Well, Simon Arkell, thank you so much for coming on Healthcare Unfiltered. Truly, it's an honor and privilege.
It's an honor and privilege for me, Chadi. Good to see you again. Thanks for having me.